So if you're on this channel, I suppose you either A, are a very specific part of a very specific demographic that consists of two people that I send these links to, and therefore they know absolutely everything that I'm talking about. They probably know where I live as well. I just don't think they are brave enough to actually threaten me. Um, or B, you know, YouTube recommended this, but if you stayed this long, just stick with me. Basically, in this channel, and this is gonna sound very demotivating, so if you actually quit now, I talk about very specific fan fiction stuff that I appreciate. It's dumb, it's ridiculous, it's the kind of stuff that gets you shamed on middle school, but guess what? I'm not in school right now and none of my friends know this, so I'm an animated skeleton covered by meat and nothing can stop me. Today I'm gonna be talking about a piece of kinda lost lore. It's not lost in the sense that, oh, no one talks about it. It's just lost because the writers included it in and just used it as a plot point because it basically does whatever the fuck the plot wants it to do. It's kind of like kryptonite in the old days, you know? The red kryptonite, you know? You could get the damn point, okay? It's plot device. There's no sugarcoating that. Regardless, I'm gonna compile everything about anti-energy. Everything means everything that's written or everything that the writers had the balls to tell me about. I don't want them to spoil everything for me, okay? I still enjoy reading stuff and actually trying to guess where it goes. Okay, so anti-energy first appeared in the Unknown War saga, and it was a very vague form of power. Essentially, it was deemed to be a sort of energy. The name says itself, but here's the thing, it was extremely rare, and apparently the only entity that can master it is Zarkin himself. It apparently grants him an endless source of power that can be tampered with and allows him to basically survive out of thin air while still doing his reality bending to an extremely large extent. As of Unknown Wars, that was not dead con, although I kinda wish it was, but essentially it was not dead con, so it's confirmed that RK had previously a limited supply of power, and with anti-energy and some tampering with other powerful entities, he managed to break that limit. So he's essentially now stacked. He's the end game. It's in wording. He's basically in the end game. He got all the achievements. He 100% at becoming a god. And the anti-energy has a big part on that. It's not used much outside of this scenario where it just powers RK, essentially, like his little personal battery, but it's worth mentioning that's where it was first mentioned. Now, the next section is a bit of what I asked Spencer privately, and stuff that you can get if you read really in between the lines. Like, you have to be some kind of History Channel at 10 p.m. kind of conspiracy theorist to get this, but I'm lazy a bit, so I asked the writers to confirm my theories rather than running with it and looking like a total idiot. Anti-energy is a naturally liquid substance, and by what the Spencer describes, is not made of atoms or particles. It's made of a subatomic sort of particle that is very malleable and can interact with all the known atoms. That includes that essentially means that it's a substance that acts as a liquid, but it's really just a bunch of charged particles, more or less weird electrons that are kind of just acting as a liquid. It has this very cool property, which is again kind of bullshitty, but essentially it's not possible to decay it by normal means. Essentially, it will just keep existing in the universe if you drag it in, and it will just bring more of itself into existence by interacting with quantum stuff. It can do this two ways, either if you give it a lot of electricity, in which case it will start to decay into copious amounts of power, but also generate more of itself, or you can really refrigerate it, and that will cause an environment which is adequate for its propagation. You can also hit it with radiation or expose it to unstable elements, and it will have essentially the same result. It has two properties which are very curious. One of them is that it can amplify certain energy stuff. For example, explosions, shots, speed, batteries in general. It essentially interacts with electrons, and since it is essentially kind of an electron, it will just adopt the same behavior. And since there's more of it and it can bring more itself into existence, you will essentially just end up with more energy as a whole. The second one is that it's infectious and somewhat beneficial to have these. It can be lethal to the touch. There's not a term that I asked him. Yeah, it's essentially if you touch it, you kind of messed up. But it's very beneficial to have it around other equipments, mostly because when it interacts, it will immediately start to quote unquote corrupt the material, but that actually just means that it's reinforcing atomic and molecular bonds and essentially making the thing stronger without basically any drawbacks. It will just be a stronger version of the material. It can also block other kinds of magic and spells potentially. I really hope that it gets used, that particular set of abilities. And one thing that he also mentioned is that each kind of lump of anti-energy that gets brought to reality, it's signed to its own little quantum clock. That's the real term. I don't know why few people know that, but yes, quantum clock, for as bullshit as it sounds, it's a real term, and that can be used to measure the age of stuff for some reason, especially with radioactive atoms. But essentially, every lump of anti-energy that gets brought into reality by external means has its own little field, like its own little arrangement. So if you bring two of these lumps together, be it by a material that's with anti-energy or by two beings, they will kind of try to rule over each other and will create weaknesses. That's one of the reasons why I can be hurt by anti-energy bullets, and later on I believe those also get translated into other creatures that use this as a strength, because yes, as much as I said this is lethal to the touch, apparently if administered in the correct doses, which means really really small, or if you're just really lucky and the plot wants you to live, it can grant superpowers of varying degrees. Though they're not as bullshit as radiation in the 90s, these powers will usually be related to high resistance, regeneration, or straight up invincibility. All depends on the quantity they were exposed, but they usually come with drawbacks depending on how you were exposed. Raw exposure will usually cause you to live a very detrimental life where you need constant exposure to external kinds of energy to keep yourself alive, but lesser dosages will have less drawbacks but also less power. So yeah, that's all pretty much we have confirmed for anti-energy. I don't know if it get used in the future, but yeah, that's pretty much all the mentions, the origins, and what the writers told me about it. I hope you enjoyed it, and goodbye.